Weak autumn light filtering through her father's study window. She traced the engraved inscription with her fingertip,
This
the Latin
passage
word
reminds
she'd
me of our
memorized
first
long
meeting.
ago.
The one by the
Veritas
river.
temporis
Indeed,
filia.
it feels like
Truth
yesterday.
is the daughter of time. Does it, Papa? She whispered to the empty room. What truth has time revealed except that I'm powerless? 8 months. 2/3 of a year since Edmund Thorne had been laid to rest in the family plot on the Eastern Hill, and
Oh my
still
word.
Rosalind found
We
herself
must be
seeking
careful.
sanctuary
I
in
know,
this room.
but I cannot stay away.
Everything remained exactly as he'd left it. The leather-bound ledgers stacked precisely on the mahogany desk, the faint scent of pipe tobacco clinging to the curtains, the morning sun illuminating the same worn patch of carpet where he'd paced while teaching her about water rights and cattle breeding. A ranch is more than land and livestock. Rosa, his voice echoed in her memory. It's people, their livelihoods, their families, their futures. Never forget that. She sank into his chair, the leather creaking familiarly, and closed her eyes. How many hours had she spent here as a girl perched on the edge of this very seat while he explained grazing patterns and market fluctuations? He'd treated her like the son he'd never had, ignoring society's expectations that young ladies concern themselves only with needlework and watercolors. You have a sharp mind, my brilliant girl, he'd said, letting her examine the ranch maps spread across the desk. Sharper than most men I know. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Well, a sharp mind. What good was it now, trapped like a bird in a gilded cage? Voices drifted from the hallway outside. Rosalind's fingers tightened around the watch as she recognized her stepmother's clipped tones, followed by the oily smoothnesses of Marcus Pike, the attorney, not the doctor brother who'd signed her father's suspicious death certificate. The door remained ajar. Rosalind started to rise to announce her presence, but something in Constance's voice stopped her. That particular edge of calculation she'd come to recognize over the past 8 months. Rosa moved silently to the heavy velvet curtain that divided the study from the adjoining sitting room. She slipped behind it, her pulse quickening. This was beneath her dignity, eavesdropping like a common Spinamine, but survival had taught her to gather information where she could find it. The will is quite clear, Marcus Pike was saying. His voice grew louder as they entered the study. Edmund Thorne named you as guardian of his daughter's inheritance until she reaches the age of 25 or marries with your approval. 3 more years. Constance's heels clicked across the hardwood floor. An eternity. Unless she marries. Precisely. Which brings us to Preston Blackwell. Rosalind pressed her hand to her mouth, forcing herself to breathe silently. Preston Blackwell. The gambler from San Francisco who'd been circling the ranch for the past month like a vulture over carrion. Mr. Blackwell is amenable to the arrangement, Pike asked. Amenable, the man is desperate. Constance laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. He owes $15,000 to various creditors in San Francisco. I've offered him a way out, marry Rosalind, and I'll settle his debts. In exchange, he signs over management of her inheritance to me for the first 10 years of their marriage. Clever, and the girl will do as she's told. She has no choice. Rosalind's vision blurred. The pocket watch slipped from her fingers, catching on its chain before she could grab it. The soft clink of silver against wood seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. What was that? Pike's voice sharpened. Nothing, probably a bird at the window. Constance moved toward the desk, her skirts whispering. Now about the land contracts. I want to finalize the sale of the southern pastures to Dawson Corporation. 5,000 acres at $12 per acre. Mrs. Thorne, I must advise caution. That land is worth at least $20 per acre in the current market. I'm aware, but Dawson Corporation is offering immediate payment and asking no questions about my authority to sell. Pike cleared his throat uncomfortably. You understand that technically Miss Rosalind owns that land. You're merely the guardian of her assets. Technically. The contempt in Constance's voice could have cut steel, and technically she won't reach her majority for 3 more years. By which time, if we play this correctly, she'll be Mrs. Preston Blackwell and thoroughly under control. They moved toward the door, their voices fading. Rosalind remained frozen behind the curtain, her mind racing through calculations. 5,000 acres, at $8 below market value. That was $40,000 stolen from her inheritance, and Constance had been managing the ranch for 8 months. How much had already disappeared? When she was certain they'd gone, Rosa emerged from her hiding place on trembling legs. She moved to the desk where her father had kept his records, pulling open drawers with unsteady hands. Most of the detailed ledgers were gone, probably locked in Constance's private rooms. But in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath old maps, she found what she needed. A small leather journal. Her father's personal accounting book, the one he'd used to track his actual numbers separate from the official ranch records. The one he'd shown her how to decipher when she was 16. Rosa flipped through the pages, her trained eye catching the discrepancies immediately. Cattle sold at prices far below their worth. Land leased to neighbors for a fraction of its value. Equipment purchased at inflated costs, likely with kickbacks to Constance. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and began copying figures, her hand steady despite the rage building in her chest. By the time she finished, the sum was staggering: $127,000. In 8 months, Constance had stolen $127,000 from the Thorn Ranch. Rosa carefully replaced the journal, smoothed the maps over it, and closed the drawer. She slipped her own notebook into the hidden pocket sewn into her riding skirt, one of many modifications she'd made to her wardrobe that Constance hadn't yet discovered. The pocket watch lay on the desk where it had fallen. She picked it up, checking for damage. The mechanism ticked steadily, undisturbed. The inscription gleamed in the afternoon light. "Truth is the daughter of time." "I'll give you truth, Constance," Rosa whispered. "All the truth time reveals." The following Saturday arrived with the heavy weight of obligation. Constance had arranged what she called a small gathering to welcome their neighbors and introduce Preston Blackwell as a dear family friend. In reality, it was a stage upon which Rosa would be displayed like prize livestock at auction. She stood before the mirror in her bedroom, studying the woman looking back. 22 years old, dark hair, pulled back in a severe style that Constance had insisted upon, wearing a dove-gray dress that drained all color from her complexion. Her father's pocket watch hung on a chain beneath her bodice, hidden from view, but pressed against her heart like a talisman. "You look pale," Constance announced, sweeping into the room without knocking. At 43, she remained beautiful in a cold, calculated way, every blonde curl precisely placed, every movement measured for maximum effect. "Use some rouge. Mr. Blackwell will think you're consumptive." "Perhaps I am ill." Rosa met her stepmother's eyes in the mirror. "Perhaps grief has made me unfit for social occasions." "Grief?" Constance's laugh was brittle. "Your father has been dead for 8 months. It's time to move forward. Time to think about your future." "My future. Or yours." The slap came without warning. Constance's palm cracked across Rosa's cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side. The shock of it, more than the pain, left Rosa momentarily breathless. "Don't you dare speak to me that way." Constance's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "I have been patient with your sulking. I have tolerated your inappropriate wandering about the ranch pretending to understand business affairs. But my patience has limits." Rosa's hand rose slowly to her burning cheek. She could feel the heat of Constance's handprint, the sting that would blossom into a bruise by evening. But she kept her voice steady. "My father taught me those business affairs. This ranch belongs to me until you marry or reach 25. 3 years, Rosalind. 3 very long years during which I control everything. Or..." Constance smoothed her skirts, her composure returning as quickly as it had shattered. "You could marry Mr. Blackwell, become mistress of your own household, end this unpleasantness." Unpleasantness. The word tasted like ash in Rosa's mouth. "Wear the rose silk this afternoon and do something about your hair. Those curls are positively wild." Constance moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Rosalind, Mr. Blackwell will be proposing marriage this evening. I suggest you accept graciously. The alternative would be unfortunate." The door closed with decisive finality. Rosa stared at her reflection, watching a single tear track down her cheek. She wiped it away roughly. No, she wouldn't give Constance the satisfaction of tears. Not yet. By late afternoon, the Thorn Ranch had transformed into a social stage. Carriages lined the circular drive, depositing their glittering cargo ranchers in their finest suits, their wives in fashionable dresses, all wearing practiced expressions of neighborly warmth that barely concealed their curiosity. Rosa stood in the main parlor, a smile fixed on her face like a mask, and endured the condolences that came 8 months too late, and the speculative glances that came right on time. Everyone knew Constance was looking to marry her off. The only question was, to whom? Preston Blackwell provided the answer. He was handsome, she had to admit. 35 years old with dark hair and the kind of easy charm that came from years of convincing people to trust him with their money. He'd arrived early, positioning himself at Rosa's side like he already owned the right. "Miss Thorne," he executed a perfect bow, his eyes conducting a calculating assessment that made her skin crawl. "You look radiant this afternoon." "Mr. Blackwell?" Rosa kept her voice neutral. I trust you're enjoying San Luis Obispo County. Very much, though I confess the landscape pales in comparison to the company. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Your stepmother tells me you're an accomplished rider. I manage. Perhaps you'd honor me with a demonstration sometime. I've always admired a woman who sits a horse well. The innuendo was subtle but unmistakable. Rosa felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from rage carefully controlled. How kind of you to say. Across the room, Constance caught her eye and nodded approvingly. The message was clear: play along, be charming, accept your fate. But Rosa's attention had snagged on someone else. A man stood near the French doors that opened onto the veranda, tall and dark-haired, with the kind of presence that drew the eye without demanding it. He wasn't dressed in the flashy style of the San Francisco crowd, just a well-tailored suit in dark gray, simple and precise. His face was all sharp angles and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing as they surveyed the gathering. Judge Nathaniel Ashford, owner of the neighboring Ashford Ranch, one of the few men her father had genuinely respected. Rosa had met him perhaps 3 times in her life, always briefly, always in the context of ranch business or legal matters. He looked older than she remembered. There was silver threading through his dark hair now, and lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of responsibility, shouldered too young. His older brother had died in the Indian Wars 6 years ago, leaving Nathaniel to inherit not just a ranch, but a title he'd never wanted. Your father spoke of you often, he'd said at Edmund's funeral, his voice low and careful. He was very proud of you. She'd barely been able to respond through her grief. Now watching him across the crowded parlor, she wondered what Edmund had told him. Wondered if he saw what was happening here, the slow-motion theft of everything her father had built. Miss Thorne, Preston's voice pulled her back. I asked if you'd like some refreshment. No, thank you, She broke off as Constance appeared at her elbow, her grip on Rosa's arm just short of painful. Preston, dear, would you excuse us for a moment? Rosalind and I need to attend to the dining arrangements. It wasn't a request. Preston bowed smoothly and retreated toward the refreshment table where several other gentlemen had gathered. Constance steered Rosa toward a quiet corner, her smile never wavering for the benefit of watching guests. But her voice when she spoke was ice. Stop staring at Judge Ashford like a starving dog. I wasn't. You were, and it's unseemly. Preston is your future, not some widower who hasn't looked at a woman since his wife died 6 years ago. She adjusted a curl that had escaped Rosa's pins, the gesture almost maternal if one didn't feel the sharp tug. Now Preston will propose after dinner. You will accept. You will smile. You will thank me for arranging such an advantageous match. Am I clear? Rosa's throat felt tight. And if I refuse? Constance's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went flat and cold. Then I'll take alternative measures. I have physicians who will testify to your instability, your hysteria, your dangerous delusions. One signature, Rosalind, and you'll spend the rest of your life in an asylum, staring at walls while I manage your inheritance as I see fit. The threat wasn't empty. Rosa had heard whispers of inconvenient women disappeared behind asylum walls, declared mad by doctors whose loyalty could be purchased. Her heart hammered against her ribs, fear and fury warring for dominance. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Constance's voice dropped to a whisper. Your father spoiled you, filled your head with ridiculous ideas about women managing ranches and making decisions. But Edmund is dead and his fantasies died with him. It's time you learned your place. Something inside Rosa snapped. Perhaps it was the casual cruelty in Constance's voice. Perhaps it was the invocation of her father's name wielded like a weapon. Perhaps it was simply 8 months of accumulated grief and rage finally finding their breaking point. My father would be ashamed of what you've become. The words emerged steadier than Rosa felt each syllable weighted with truth. He married you because he thought you'd be a companion after Mother died. He trusted you, and you've spent 8 months dismantling everything he built, selling off his legacy piece by piece, treating his daughter like property to be liquidated. Constance's face went white, then red. How dare you? He would be ashamed, Rosa repeated, her voice shaking but firm, and I won't let you destroy what's left of his memory by marrying Preston Blackwell. The slap came harder this time. The crack echoed across the parlor like a gunshot, sharp and shocking. Conversation died mid-sentence. Laughter cut off abruptly. The assembled guests turned as one, drawn by the spectacle of violence barely contained by social propriety. Pain exploded across Rosa's cheek, hot and stinging. Her head snapped to the side from the force of it, And for a moment, the world tilted sideways, crystal chandeliers blurring into wallpaper faces, merging into a watercolor wash of shock. Time seemed to suspend itself. Rosa registered details with crystalline clarity. The gasps from nearby guests who'd witnessed the strike. The way sounds seemed to fade and then rush back in a wave. The metallic taste of blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Her father's pocket watch chain cold against her throat where it had twisted with the impact. Through watering eyes, she saw guests frozen in various attitudes of shock. Ladies with hands pressed to mouths. Gentlemen half turned toward the commotion. Even the servants had stopped moving, creating a tableau of suspended animation. Constance stood before her chest, heaving her carefully maintained mask of civility completely shattered. Rage contorted her features into something ugly and raw. "You forget your place, girl." She raised her hand again. Rosa flinched, hating herself for the involuntary response, unable to stop it. She braced for the second blow, her eyes squeezing shut. It never came. Instead, she heard a sharp intake of breath from Constance, followed by a voice so cold it seemed to lower the temperature of the entire room. "That was your last mistake, Mrs. Thorne." Rosa's eyes flew open. Judge Nathaniel Ashford stood between her and Constance, his hand locked around her stepmother's wrist, stopping the descending slap mid-swing. His grip appeared almost casual, but Constance's face had gone pale, suggesting the strength behind it was anything but gentle. The crowd that had been forming at a distance suddenly pressed closer, drawn by the spectacle of a judge intervening in a family dispute. Rosa could see their faces: shock, curiosity, gleeful scandal. The moment would be dissected in drawing rooms across San Luis Obispo County by evening. "Your Honor," Constance's voice emerged, strangled her social instincts, struggling to reassert control. "This is a family matter. The girl is hysterical, ungrateful. She needs discipline." "What she needs," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice carrying absolute authority despite its quiet delivery, "is protection from you." He released Constance's wrist with obvious distaste, then turned to Rosa. His gray eyes softened fractionally as he took in her tear-stained face and trembling form. "Miss Thorne, would you do me the honor of accompanying me outside? I believe some fresh air would be beneficial." Rosa opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her cheek throbbed. Her mind spun. This couldn't be happening. Judges didn't intervene in domestic disputes. They certainly didn't publicly challenge the guardians of young ladies, no matter the provocation. Before she could formulate a response, Nathaniel turned back to address the assembled crowd. His voice carried across the parlor with absolute clarity, brooking no argument. "Mrs. Thorne, I believe it would be best if you retired for the evening. Miss Rosalind will be staying at Ashford Ranch until proper arrangements can be made." The gasps that rippled through the crowd were audible even over the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. This was more than intervention. This was a public claiming of responsibility, nearly scandalous in its implications. "You cannot simply—" Constance's composure cracked completely. "She's my stepdaughter. Legally, I am her guardian until she marries or reaches her majority. You have no right." "I have every right as an officer of the court to intervene when I witness assault." Nathaniel's tone suggested the conversation was finished. "My attorney will contact you tomorrow regarding the legality of your guardianship. Given what I've just witnessed, I suspect the courts will have questions about your fitness for that role. Good evening, madam." He offered his arm to Rosa with the same formal courtesy he might extend to visiting royalty. "Miss Thorne." Rosa stared at his outstretched arm as if it were a lifeline thrown to someone drowning, which perhaps it was. Her entire world had just shifted on its axis in the space of minutes. Humiliation warred with relief, terror with gratitude. She was ruined. No respectable family would receive her after this scandal. But she was also free, or as close to free as a woman in her position could be. Her hand still shaking, reached for his arm. The moment her fingers touched his sleeve, she felt the trembling worsen, her entire body beginning to shake with delayed shock. "Steady," Nathaniel murmured low enough that only she could hear. "Just a few steps. You can do this." They walked through the crowd together, every face turned towards them. Some shocked, some delighted by the gossip, some openly disapproving. Rosa kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at the judgment in their expressions. Her cheek burned, her legs felt unsteady. But Nathaniel's arm remained solid beneath her hand, an anchor in chaos. She glanced back once, unable to help herself. Constance stood alone near the refreshment table, fury and calculation warring on her face. But beyond her, half hidden behind a potted palm, stood Beatrice. Her stepsister's expression held something Rosa had never seen there before. Regret, perhaps, or recognition. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Beatrice, offered the smallest of nods before looking away. Then they passed through the front door into the cool California evening, and the parlor's noise faded behind them. Rosa had stepped from one world into something entirely unknown. As the reality of what had just happened began to settle over her like a weight, she realized with dizzy certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The carriage ride to Ashford Ranch passed in silence. Nathaniel had helped her into his buggy with careful courtesy, as if she were made of spun glass that might shatter at rough handling. Perhaps she was. Rosa sat rigid on the leather seat, hands clasped in her lap, watching the familiar landscape roll past in the golden light of late afternoon. She'd ridden this road 1,000 times. Past the split oak that marked the boundary between Thorne and Ashford land, past the creek where she'd learned to fish as a child, past the meadow where her father had taught her to identify different grasses for grazing quality. Everything looked the same, but she was different now, transformed in the space of a slap and a rescue into something she didn't yet understand. "Are you in pain?" Nathaniel's voice was quiet, carefully neutral. Rosa touched her cheek gingerly. The skin was hot and tender, already swelling. "I've had worse." It was the wrong thing to say. She knew it the moment the words left her mouth. Nathaniel's hands tightened on the reins, his jaw setting in a hard line. "How often?" he asked. "That's not—" Rosa stopped herself. She was too tired to lie, too shaken to maintain the pretense of civility. "Often enough, though usually she's more careful about leaving marks where people can see them." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken anger. But when Nathaniel spoke again, his voice remained controlled. "Your father asked me to look after you if anything happened to him." Rosa's head snapped around. "What? About 3 months before he died. We were discussing estate planning. He'd been making arrangements to update his will. He mentioned his concerns about Constance." Nathaniel kept his eyes on the road, but something in his posture had shifted. "He said he'd made a mistake marrying her, that he'd been lonely after your mother died, and Constance had been persuasive, but he'd started to see through the performance. He never said anything to me. He didn't want to worry you, and I think he hoped he was wrong." Nathaniel paused. "He asked me to ensure you'd be protected if something happened to him. I promised I would." Rosa felt tears threatening again. She blinked them back fiercely. "You didn't know he'd die so suddenly." "No, heart failure," the doctor said. "Sudden and unexpected." Nathaniel's voice held something Rosa couldn't quite identify. "I've wondered since then if it was truly as unexpected as it seemed." The implication hung in the air between them. "You think Constance—" Rosa couldn't finish the sentence. "I think your stepmother is a woman who marries well and is widowed conveniently." Nathaniel finally looked at her, his gray eyes sharp with intelligence. "I think she's done it before, and I think someone should look very carefully at the circumstances of your father's death." The Ashford Ranch house appeared in the distance, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that had stood for 30 years. Smoke rose from the chimneys. Lights glowed in the windows. It looked warm and solid and safe, everything Rosa's own home hadn't been for 8 months. "Why are you helping me?" The question emerged before she could stop it. "You barely know me. This will cause you nothing but trouble." Nathaniel guided the horses up the circular drive. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because I made a promise to a good man. And because—" He hesitated, then continued. "Because I've seen what happens when power goes unchecked. When people who should protect instead exploit. I won't stand by and watch it happen." The buggy stopped before the main entrance. A woman appeared on the porch, elderly, silver-haired, wearing a practical dress and an expression of fierce intelligence. She moved down the steps with surprising speed for someone who had to be nearly 70. "Nathaniel." Her voice was crisp, cultured, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I received your message. The girl's to stay here. If you're willing, Aunt Imogen." Nathaniel climbed down and moved to help Rosa. "May I introduce Miss Rosalind Thorne? Rosa, this is my Aunt Imogen Ashford." Imogen's sharp blue eyes took in Rosa's tear-stained face and swelling cheek in one comprehensive glance. Her expression softened fractionally. "Child, you look like you've been through a war." "I feel like it," Rosa admitted. "Well, come inside. We'll get some ice on that cheek and some tea in your stomach. Then we'll discuss what's to be done about that stepmother of yours." Imogen turned toward the house, gesturing for them to follow. "I've been wanting to take Constance Vale down a peg for months. She's been insufferable at every social gathering, acting as if she built the Thorne Ranch of herself rather than married into it." Despite everything, Rosa felt a smile tugging at her lips. There was something bracing about Imogen's blunt assessment, something that cut through the fog of shock that had settled over her. The interior of Ashford Ranch was warm and lived in nothing like the cold perfection Constance had imposed on the Thorne house. Books lined the walls of the entrance hall. Comfortable furniture showed the wear of actual use rather than decorative display. A fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace, throwing dancing shadows across the hardwood floors. Imogen led them to a sitting room where she'd apparently been working a desk piled with papers, ink stains on the blotter, a newspaper open to an editorial page. She noticed Rosa's curious glance. "I edit the Western Truth," Imogen explained, gesturing to the newspaper. "Started it 10 years ago when I got tired of reading nothing but gossip and advertisements. Someone needed to discuss real issues: land rights, water law, women's suffrage." "Women's suffrage?" Rosa couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "You sound shocked. Why shouldn't women vote? We pay taxes, don't we? We're subject to laws, aren't we? Taxation without representation, my dear. The founding fathers fought a war over less." Imogen disappeared into an adjoining room and returned with a cloth-wrapped bundle of ice. "Sit. Let me see that cheek." Rosa sat, allowing the older woman to press the ice gently against her swollen face. The cold was shocking at first, then blessed relief. "Now then," Imogen settled into a chair across from her, fixing Rosa with that penetrating stare. "Nathaniel has given me the basics. Your stepmother struck you in front of witnesses. He intervened and brought you here, but I want to hear from you what's really happening at Thorne Ranch." Rosa glanced at Nathaniel, who'd positioned himself by the fireplace, watching with those careful gray eyes. Something in his expression gave her permission. Or perhaps it was simply that she was tired of carrying the weight alone. She told them everything. The eavesdropped conversation about forcing her marriage to Preston Blackwell. The discovered ledgers showing $127,000 in missing funds. The systematic dismantling of her father's legacy. The threats of asylum commitment if she didn't comply. As she spoke, Imogen's expression grew progressively darker. Nathaniel's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, the only visible sign of his anger. When Rosa finished, silence filled the room. Then Imogen stood, moving to a small cabinet and pouring 3 glasses of whiskey. She handed one to Rosa, despite the younger woman's surprised expression. "Drink, you've earned it." Rosa sipped. The whiskey burned going down, but the warmth spreading through her chest was steadying. "Right." Imogen sat again, her whiskey held like a weapon. "Here's what we're going to do. First, Nathaniel will contact Harrison Whitmore. He's the son of Robert Whitmore, your father's old attorney. Harrison is young but brilliant, and he owes Nathaniel a favor. He'll review the guardianship provisions in your father's will and look for grounds to challenge Constance's authority." "She has doctors ready to declare me insane," Rosa said quietly. "Then we'll find doctors who'll testify to your perfect sanity." Imogen waved the concern away like smoke. "I know several physicians who owe me favors from my suffrage work. They won't be intimidated by some quack Constance bribed." "Second," Nathaniel added, his voice measured, "we need to document the financial fraud. The ledgers you mentioned, can you get access to them again?" Rosa thought about the hidden journal in her father's desk. "Possibly. But Constance has locked away most of the official records. We'll work with what we have. Harrison can subpoena the official books if necessary." Nathaniel moved to the desk, pulling paper and pen toward him. "Third, we need to protect you legally. You're 22, correct? 3 years until you reach majority." "Yes, my birthday is April 7th. I'll be 23 in 6 months. California law is murky on guardianship challenges, but it can be done with sufficient cause. Physical abuse, financial malfeasance, attempted coercion into marriage, all of those strengthen our case." He began making notes, his handwriting precise and controlled. "The difficulty is that Constance has legal standing as your guardian. Any challenge will take time. Time I may not have if she moves forward with commitment proceedings." Rosa set down her whiskey glass, her hands steadier now. "How long would I need to stay here?" "As long as necessary," Imogen said firmly. "My presence ensures propriety. I'm a respectable widow of a certain age. Your reputation will survive." "Will it?" Rosa looked between them. "After that scene today, after Judge Ashford publicly removed me from my own home—" "I didn't remove you," Nathaniel corrected quietly. "I offered you sanctuary from assault. There's a difference, and any decent person will understand that difference." "Decent people, yes, but we don't live in a world populated entirely by decent people." Rosa stood pacing to the window. The sun had set fully now, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Constance will use this. She'll twist it into proof that I'm unstable, that I can't be trusted to make my own decisions." "Let her try." Imogen's voice was sharp with anticipation. "I have a newspaper. I know how to shape a narrative. By the time I'm finished, Constance Vale Thorne will be the villain of San Luis Obispo County, not you. Rosa turned from the window, studying the two people who'd become her unexpected allies. Imogen fierce and unapologetic in her convictions. Nathaniel calm and precise, every word chosen with care. They barely knew her yet, here they were ready to wage war on her behalf. Why? The question emerged softer than intended. Why fight for me? Either of you, Imogen and Nathaniel exchanged a glance, some communication Rosa couldn't quite read passing between them. Because I'm 70 years old, Imogen said finally, and I've spent 50 of those years watching women be controlled, diminished, and silenced by laws and customs designed to keep them powerless. I've had enough. If I can help one young woman break free, then perhaps the last 20 years I spent advocating for suffrage wasn't entirely wasted. Nathaniel's answer took longer. He remained at the desk, his pen poised over the paper, not looking at either of them. 6 years ago, he said, quietly, my wife died giving birth to our daughter. The baby died too. I was in Sacramento arguing a case before the state Supreme Court. I received a telegram, come home immediately. Emergency. By the time I arrived, they were both gone. Rosa's throat tightened. She'd heard rumors of Nathaniel's tragic marriage, but the raw pain in his voice made it real in a way gossip never could. For a long time after that, I blamed myself. If I'd been there, if I'd prioritized differently, if I'd seen the warning signs. He finally looked up, meeting Rosa's eyes. Eventually, I realized that guilt was pointless. The past couldn't be changed, but the future could. I couldn't save my wife or my daughter, but I could honor them by protecting others when I had the power to do so. He paused, then added, and your father was kind to me when I needed it most. He didn't offer platitudes or religious comfort. He offered practical wisdom. He said, the only way through grief is through it. Don't try to go around. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other until the day comes when you realize you've walked through to the other side. I never forgot that. The room fell silent again, but this time the quiet held weight, the heft of shared griefs, shared determination, shared purpose. Thank you, Rosa said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. Imogen stood briskly, the moment of vulnerability passing. Right. You'll stay in the guest room on the second floor. It has a lock on the door and overlooks the front drive. You'll see if anyone approaches. Tomorrow we'll begin gathering evidence and building our case. Tonight you rest. I don't think I can rest. Then you can lie awake in comfort instead of fear. It's an improvement. Imogen moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Rosalind, that stepmother of yours made a critical mistake today. What's that? She struck you in front of witnesses. In front of a judge, no less. Anger made her careless. We're going to use that carelessness against her. Imogen's smile was sharp enough to cut. I suspect Constance Vale Thorne is about to discover what happens when you underestimate your opponent. The guest room was larger than Rosa's chamber at home, decorated in soft blues and creams that caught the moonlight streaming through tall windows. Someone, probably one of the house staff, had laid out a nightgown and robe, placed fresh water in the basin, and turned down the bed. Rosa moved to the window, looking out over the darkened landscape. In the distance, she could just make out the lights of Thorne Ranch, her home for 22 years. It looked peaceful from here, beautiful even. No hint of the poison that had infected it since her father's death. She pulled the pocket watch from beneath her bodice, turning it over in her hands. The silver was warm from her skin. She opened it, studying the inscription one more time. Veritas temporis filia. Truth is the daughter of time. Her father had given her this watch on her 18th birthday, along with a lecture about patience and wisdom. Time reveals all truths eventually, he'd said. The trick is surviving long enough to see them revealed. She'd thought she understood what he meant. But now, holding the watch in a stranger's house, while her stepmother plotted her destruction, Rosa realized she'd barely scratched the surface of his wisdom. Time would reveal the truth about Constance, about the missing money, about her father's death if Nathaniel's suspicions proved correct. But would Rosa survive long enough to see it? A soft knock at the door made her turn. Come in. Nathaniel entered, carrying a tea tray with careful precision. Imogen thought you might want something warm before sleep. Chamomile and honey. He set the tray on the small table near the window, then seemed uncertain what to do with his hands. Rosa recognized the awkwardness, the social dance of propriety, when propriety itself had been shattered by the day's events. Thank you, she said, pouring herself a cup. The steam rose fragrant and soothing. For everything. The rescue, the sanctuary, the promise to fight. You don't need to thank me. I do, though. You risked your reputation, too. Judge Ashford publicly removing a young lady from her guardian's care. The gossips will have a field day. A slight smile touched his lips the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his entire face, softening the sharp angles into something almost boyish. Let them gossip. I've survived worse. He moved to the window, standing beside her to look out at the night. For a long moment they stood in companionable silence. Then Nathaniel spoke, his voice thoughtful. Your father used to quote Marcus Aurelius at me. Did you know that? Rosa shook her head, surprised. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He said it after my wife died, when I was drowning in grief and guilt and couldn't see a path forward. Nathaniel's expression turned distant, remembering. He told me that sometimes obstacles aren't roadblocks, they're redirections. That the thing we think will destroy us often becomes the catalyst that transforms us into who we're meant to be. And did it transform you? I don't know yet. Ask me when this is over. He turned to face her fully. But I think the same principle applies to you. Constance is your impediment. The question is, will you let her be a roadblock, or will you let her be the catalyst that reveals who you truly are? Rosa considered that, sipping her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. I don't know who I truly am. I thought I did rancher's daughter, her father's protege, competent and capable. But these past 8 months have shown me how fragile all of that was, how quickly it could be stripped away. No, Nathaniel's voice was firm. Constance stripped away the trappings, the title, the authority, the security. But who you are, that's still there. That's what she can't touch, no matter how hard she tries. He reached out, then seemed to catch himself, his hand falling back to his side. Get some rest, Miss Thorne. Tomorrow we begin taking back what's yours. After he left, Rosa sat by the window for a long time, watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky. Her cheek throbbed where Constance had struck her. Her future stretched uncertain and frightening before her. But for the first time in 8 months, she wasn't alone. And perhaps that was catalyst enough. Morning arrived too soon and too bright. Rosa woke to unfamiliar sounds, birds she didn't recognize. Footsteps in hallways she'd never walked, the distant lowing of cattle from pastures that weren't hers. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned in a rush, the slap, the rescue, the sanctuary. She sat up, wincing as the movement pulled at muscles she hadn't known were tense. Her reflection in the vanity mirror showed what she'd expected, a bruise blooming across her left cheek in shades of purple and yellow, testament to Constance's rage. A soft knock preceded Imogen's entrance. The older woman carried a breakfast tray and wore an expression of grim satisfaction. Good, you're awake. Eat something, then come downstairs. Harrison Whitmore arrived an hour ago and we have work to do. The young attorney was waiting in Nathaniel's study, surrounded by papers and wearing the intense expression of someone who'd found a puzzle worth solving. Harrison couldn't have been more than 30, with sandy hair and sharp eyes that assessed Rosa with professional interest rather than pity. Miss Thorne, he gestured to a chair, I've been reviewing your father's will. The guardianship clause is, problematic. Problematic how? Rosa sat, accepting the coffee Nathaniel handed her. It gives Mrs. Thorne broad authority until you reach 25 or marry with her approval. However, Harrison pulled out a document covered in notes. California law allows guardianship challenges on grounds of unfitness, physical abuse, financial malfeasance, or actions contrary to the ward's best interests all qualify. We have evidence of all three, Imogen said crisply. She'd positioned herself at the desk like a general planning campaign strategy. The public assault, the financial records Rosalind discovered, the attempted coercion into marriage with a known gambler. Harrison nodded. The difficulty is timing. A formal challenge could take months. During that time, Mrs. Thorne retains legal authority. She could move forward with commitment proceedings, force the marriage, or take other actions to consolidate her control. Then we need to move faster than the courts. Nathaniel had been standing by the window watching the eastern hills where the sun climbed higher. Now he turned, his expression thoughtful. Harrison, what if Miss Thorne were to return to Thorne Ranch not as a dependent ward but as an acting manager? Rosa's head snapped up. What? Hear me out. Nathaniel moved to the desk, his hands clasped behind his back, in a posture Rosa was beginning to recognize as his thinking stance. California law is murky on guardianship of adult women, but it's quite clear on property management. If you were to assert your right to participate in ranch operations, Constance would have difficulty stopping you without revealing her own malfeasance. She'd never allow it, Rosa protested. She wouldn't have a choice, not if you do it correctly. Harrison was already making notes, his pen flying across the paper. The will names Mrs. Thorne as guardian of your inheritance, but it doesn't explicitly forbid you from working on the ranch itself. In fact, many of the original deeds list Edmund Thorne and heirs, that's you. Imogen leaned forward, understanding dawning. You're suggesting Rosalind assert a technical distinction. She's not claiming ownership, which would trigger the guardianship clause. She's claiming the right to work, which is protected under common law. Exactly. Nathaniel's voice carried quiet certainty. And if she's working there, she can document everything Constance is doing, gather evidence that would otherwise be hidden, build an airtight case for the guardianship challenge. The idea was audacious and terrifying in equal measure. Rosa set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. You want me to go back, to live under Constance's roof while investigating her crimes? I want you to reclaim your father's legacy, Nathaniel corrected gently. On your terms. Not as a victim seeking rescue, but as a competent woman asserting her rights. The distinction mattered. Rosa could see that in the careful way all three of them watched her waiting for her decision. This wasn't them saving her. This was them offering her the tools to save herself. How long, she asked. How long would I need to maintain this charade? Harrison calculated quickly. 6 months minimum. Long enough to document a pattern of fraud, gather testimony from ranch workers, and build a case strong enough that no judge could dismiss it. By then, you'll be 23, closer to majority. It strengthens our position. 6 months. Half a year of living in the lion's den pretending subservience while gathering ammunition. The prospect made Rosa's stomach clench with anxiety, but the alternative was worse. Hiding at Ashford Ranch while Constance sold off her father's legacy piece by piece. Waiting passively for legal proceedings that might never succeed. Letting someone else fight her battles. What stands in the way becomes the way. I'll do it, Rosa said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. But I need guarantees. I need to know I'm not walking into this alone. You won't be. Nathaniel's gray eyes held hers with steady intensity. I'll visit weekly under the pretense of neighborly calls. Imogen will include you in her social circle and suffrage meetings, cultural gatherings. Harrison will be working behind the scenes on the legal challenge. You'll have support. And if Constance attempts anything, commitment, forced marriage, physical harm, we move immediately to extract you. And in the meantime, Imogen added, steel in her voice, you'll be learning about ranch management, legal strategy, financial accounting, everything your father wanted to teach you but Constance has been preventing. When this is over, you won't just reclaim your inheritance. You'll be fully capable of managing it. Rosa looked around the study at these three people who'd become her unexpected allies. An elderly suffragette with a newspaper and connections, a widowed judge with a conscience and legal expertise, a young attorney with ambition and skill. They were offering her more than sanctuary. They were offering her education partnership and the chance to become who her father had believed she could be. When do I start? The return to Thorne Ranch happened 3 days later, orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. Harrison had sent a formal letter to Constance, citing California property law and Rosa's rights as Edmund Thorne's direct heir to participate in ranch operations. The letter was carefully worded, not a challenge but a clarification. Rosa would be resuming her education in ranch management as her father had intended. Constance's response had been predictably venomous, delivered via her attorney Marcus Pike. But the legal ground was solid enough that she couldn't outright refuse without revealing her own vulnerability. So Rosa found herself standing in the entrance hall of her childhood home, a single trunk of belongings beside her, facing the woman who'd struck her 3 days prior. Constance looked immaculate as always, blonde curls, perfectly arranged morning dress, impeccably fitted. Only the cold fury in her eyes betrayed her true feelings. I trust you understand the conditions of your return, she said, her voice glacial. I understand that I have a legal right to learn about my own inheritance, Rosa replied evenly. She'd practiced this conversation with Imogen, learning to match ice with ice. You'll follow my rules. You'll attend social functions as required. And you will not embarrass me further with dramatic scenes. Constance moved closer, lowering her voice so the hovering servants couldn't hear. Judge Ashford may have interfered once, but he won't always be watching. Cross me again, Rosalind, and I'll ensure you regret it. I'm sure you'll try. The words were out before Rosa could stop them. Constance's eyes narrowed dangerously, but before she could respond, Beatrice appeared on the stairs. Mother, the dressmaker is here for your fitting. The younger woman's voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes met Rosa's with something that might have been apology. She says she can only wait 30 minutes. Constance's jaw tightened, but she was too vain to miss an appointment with her dressmaker. We'll continue this conversation later. Beatrice ensures Rosalind is settled in her room and makes sure she understands the household schedule. After Constance swept away, the tension in the hall eased fractionally. Beatrice descended the stairs slowly, her movements tentative. I didn't know, she said quietly, about the money she was stealing, about how bad it had gotten. Rosa studied her stepsister, 19 years old, pretty in an unremarkable way, and shaped by Constance's cruelty just as thoroughly as Rosa had been, if differently. Beatrice had learned to survive by becoming invisible, by never challenging, by accepting whatever scraps of approval their mother doled out. You know now, Rosa said, not quite forgiveness, but not condemnation either. I heard her talking to Mr. Pike about commitment papers, about making sure you could never challenge her legally. Beatrice glanced toward the sitting room where Constance had disappeared. I thought you should know. She's going to move soon, within the month. This was more than Beatrice had ever offered before. Rosa felt something shift, not trust, not yet, but the possibility of alliance. Thank you for telling me. Beatrice nodded, then gestured toward the stairs. Your room is as you left it. Mother hasn't changed anything. She said it would be wasteful to redecorate for temporary circumstances. The barb was pure Constance, even secondhand. But Rosa climbed the stairs to her old room and found it exactly as she'd left it 8 months ago, before her father's death, before Constance's true nature had fully emerged. Books on the shelves, her mother's watercolors on the walls, the window seat where she'd spent countless hours reading while rain drummed against the glass. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, it felt like visiting a museum of who she used to be. Rosa set down her trunk and pulled out the leather journal Harrison had given her. Document everything, he'd said. Dates, times, amounts, witnesses. Build your case one detail at a time. She opened to the first page and began to write. September 15th, 1885. Return to Thorn Ranch. Constance threatened retaliation but cannot legally prevent my presence. Beatrice warned that commitment proceedings are planned for within the month. Need to accelerate evidence gathering. It was a start. The first week established patterns. Rosa woke early before Constance rose and rode out to the pastures with Tobias Morgan, the ranch foreman. The grizzled cowboy had worked for her father for 20 years and made no secret of his contempt for Constance's management. She sold the South Pasture breeding stock to Dawson at half price, he told Rosa on the third morning, gesturing to empty fields that should have held prime Hereford cattle. Your daddy bred those lines for 15 years. Now they're gone, and we're buying inferior stock to replace them. Rosa noted everything in her journal: dates, amounts, the names of buyers, and the discrepancy between sale price and market value. In the afternoons, she worked in her father's study, ostensibly reviewing ranch records, actually copying every transaction she could find that showed Constance's theft. The numbers grew staggering. $127,000 had been the figure from her father's private ledger. But the official books showed additional disappearances, equipment purchases that never arrived, salaries paid to workers who didn't exist, land leases at rates that defied market logic. By the end of the first week, Rosa's documentation suggested Constance had stolen nearly $200,000. The evenings were worst. Dinner with Constance and Beatrice maintaining civil conversation, while Raj simmered beneath Rosa's composure. Constance would make pointed comments about Rosa's appearance, her manners, her unladylike interest in ranch affairs. Rosa learned to let the words wash over her like water over stone, responding with bland agreement while her mind cataloged evidence. But the nights were for something else. Nathaniel had been true to his word. He visited every Sunday afternoon under the pretense of neighborly calls, bringing books from his library and engaging Rosa in conversations that were ostensibly about ranch business, but became something deeper. Their first real discussion happened in the garden away from Constance's prying ears. Have you read Seneca's letters to Lucilius? Nathaniel asked, handing her a worn leather volume. Rosa opened it carefully. The pages were marked with notes in a precise hand, Nathaniel's own annotations. My father quoted him occasionally. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. That one, yes, but there's another passage I've found helpful. Nathaniel reached over and turned to a marked page. Here, letter 78. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult. Rosa read the words, feeling them resonate. You're saying I need to dare. I'm saying you're already daring, living under Constance's roof while documenting her crimes. That takes courage most people don't possess. His gray eyes were serious intent. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear. And that's what you're doing. They fell into a pattern after that. Sunday afternoons became philosophy seminars disguised as neighborly visits. They debated Stoic principles, Aurelius on acceptance, Epictetus on control, Seneca on the brevity of life. But the discussions were never purely academic. Each philosophical question reflected back on Rosa's situation, giving her frameworks for understanding and enduring. Aurelius writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," Nathaniel said one afternoon in late October as autumn rain drummed against the windows. "What does that mean for your circumstances?" Rosa considered, turning her teacup in her hands. "That I can't control Constance's actions, only my response to them. And that my mind, my understanding, my documentation, my preparation, that's where my true power lies." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Constance controls the legal framework right now, but I control the truth. And truth, as my father's watch reminds me, is the daughter of time." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a deepening of respect, perhaps a recognition. "Your father would be proud of how you're handling this." "Would he?" Rosa's voice caught. "I'm not sure. I'm living in my enemy's house, pretending a submission while planning her destruction. That's not exactly noble. It's strategic. There's a difference." Nathaniel leaned forward, his intensity palpable. "Nobility isn't about grand gestures or public martyrdom. It's about doing what's necessary to protect what matters, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." The rain intensified, creating a cocoon of sound around them. In the privacy of that moment, Rosa allowed herself a question she'd been holding back. "Why did you really intervene at the party, I mean? You barely knew me. My father asked you to look after me, but that was before he died. You could have simply not." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was careful, each word chosen with precision. "6 years ago, when my wife died, I made a decision. I decided that grief would make me better, not bitter. That loss would teach me to value what matters: justice, kindness, protection of those who cannot protect themselves." He paused. "And then I spent 6 years keeping everyone at a distance, being the ice judge, as they call me, competent but cold, effective but emotionally frozen." He turned back to her, and Rosa was startled by the vulnerability in his expression. "When I saw Constance strike you, something in me cracked. I realized I'd been using Stoicism as an excuse for isolation. Marcus Aurelius teaches acceptance of what we cannot change, but he also teaches action where action is possible. I could act, so I did. And now," Rosa's voice was barely above a whisper, "now I find myself invested in your success, in seeing justice done. He stopped himself, seeming to reconsider. "In honoring the promise I made to your father. That matters to me." It wasn't a declaration, but it was something, an acknowledgement of connection, of the alliance between them evolving into something neither had quite named. "I should go," Nathaniel said, rising. "Constance will be back from her call soon, and my presence will only antagonize her." "Nathaniel," Rosa stood as well, using his first name deliberately. "Thank you for the books, for the conversations, for reminding me that I'm more than what she's tried to make me." His hand found hers briefly, the first deliberate touch since the night of the rescue. His fingers were warm, steady grounding. "You've always been more than that," he said quietly. "I'm just helping you remember." They walked back to the house, hand in hand, talking about legislative strategy and ranch improvements and philosophy, the conversation flowing easily between professional and personal topics. It felt natural, right? Not a rescue, not a dependency, but a genuine partnership between equals who'd chosen each other from strength, not need. Winter descended on San Luis Obispo County with cold rains and shortened days. Rosa's life developed a rhythm that was equal parts endurance and education. Mornings with Tobias, learning the intricacies of cattle management her father had begun teaching her. Afternoons in the study, documenting Constance's crimes with meticulous detail. Evenings maintaining the facade of obedient ward. Sundays with Nathaniel, feeding her mind and spirit with philosophy and conversation. But it was Imogen who provided the next piece of Rosa's transformation. "You're coming to the suffrage meeting Thursday evening," Imogen announced one Sunday in November, brooking no argument. "We meet at the Grange Hall. Discussion, strategy, and the kind of conversation that will remind you there's a world beyond Constance's manipulation." Rosa hesitated. "Constance won't approve." "I didn't ask for Constance's approval. I'm informing you of your attendance." Imogen's smile was sharp. "Besides, several prominent ranch wives will be there. Constance can hardly object without revealing her own prejudices." The Grange Hall was packed Thursday evening, 40 women of varying ages from young wives in their 20s to grandmothers with steel gray hair. Rosa recognized several from social gatherings, but here they were transformed. Animated, passionate, unafraid. Imogen called the meeting to order with a brass bell and a voice that carried authority. Ladies, thank you for braving the cold. Tonight we're discussing property rights for married women, specifically the legal fiction that a woman's property becomes her husband's upon marriage. What followed was 2 hours of the most intellectually stimulating conversation Rosa had experienced since her father's death. These women weren't discussing fashion or gossip. They were debating law, ethics, philosophy. They quoted John Stuart Mill and Mary Wollstonecraft. They shared stories of husbands who'd bankrupted families, fathers who'd sold daughters' inheritances, legal systems that treated women as property rather than people. It's coverture, explained a sharp-eyed woman introduced as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, one of the county's few female physicians. The legal doctrine that a married woman's identity is subsumed into her husband's. She cannot own property, cannot sign contracts, cannot even have legal custody of her own children. It's barbaric, Rosa said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Every eye turned to her. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, suddenly conscious of being the youngest person present. But Imogen just smiled. Go on, Rosalind. Why is it barbaric? Because, Rosa gathered her thoughts, remembering her father's lessons about logic and argument. Because it treats women as perpetual children, incapable of rational thought or responsible decision-making. But that's demonstrably false. Women run households, manage budgets, raise children, operate businesses when widowed. The only difference between a married woman and an unmarried one isn't capacity, it's legal recognition. Exactly. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward. And that legal fiction serves a purpose. It keeps women dependent. It ensures we can't leave abusive marriages. It allows unscrupulous men to steal our inheritances with legal impunity. The discussion expanded from there. Stories of injustice, strategies for change, debates about whether gradual reform or radical action would be more effective. Rosa found herself contributing, her mind engaged in a way it hadn't been for months. Afterward, as women gathered their shawls and prepared to brave the cold night, several approached Rosa with warm encouragement. Your father would be proud, said elderly Miss Thornton, whose husband had died, leaving her with nothing because he'd gambled away her inheritance. Edmund always said you had the sharpest mind in the county. Come back next week, Dr. Mitchell urged. We're discussing educational access. I think you'd have valuable perspectives. On the ride home, Imogen was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, she spoke. You're angry. It wasn't a question. Rosa considered denying it, then realized there was no point. Yes. Good. Anger is useful. It's fuel. The trick is using it constructively rather than letting it consume you. Imogen glanced at her in the darkness. What are you angry about? Everything. Rosa's laugh was bitter. The law that gives Constance control over my inheritance. The expectation that I should marry Preston Blackwell and transfer that control to him. The fact that if I do marry my husband, whoever he is, will own everything I inherit. The entire system that treats women like property to be managed rather than people with agency. And I'm angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for accepting it as normal, for thinking my situation was unique rather than systematic. Imogen nodded slowly. Your father protected you from the worst of it. He educated you, gave you agency, treated you as capable. That was a gift. But it also meant you didn't fully understand how rare that was, how many women live their entire lives under male control, unable to imagine alternatives. What do I do with this anger? You use it, you let it drive you to document every crime Constance commits. You let it fuel your determination to reclaim your inheritance. And when you succeed, and you will succeed, you use your position to help other women. Money is power, Rosalind. And power in the hands of women who understand injustice can change the world. Christmas arrived bleak and cold. Constance threw an elaborate party ostensibly to celebrate the season, actually to parade her social status, and Rosa suspected to provide Preston Blackwell another opportunity to court her. Preston had been a constant presence since Rosa's return to Thorn Ranch. Constance invited him to dinner, weekly arranged coincidental meetings at social functions, and made pointed comments about suitable matches and Rosa's advancing age. 23 in April, Constance said at breakfast one morning in late December. Practically a spinster. Most girls your age are married with children. How fortunate I'm not most girls, Rosa replied, not looking up from her eggs. Preston's courtship was aggressive and increasingly difficult to deflect. He brought gifts, expensive jewelry. Rosa refused to accept books she had no interest in reading, flowers that wilted in her room. He monopolized her attention at social functions. He made increasingly bold physical advances, a hand at her waist, fingers brushing her arm, sitting too close during dinner. At the Christmas party, he cornered her in the library. Miss Thorne, his smile was practiced, charming to those who didn't look too closely. You've been avoiding me. I've been busy with ranch management. Rosa moved toward the door, but he stepped to block her path. Your stepmother speaks very highly of my prospects. I think we could have a mutually beneficial arrangement. I'm not interested in arrangements, Mr. Blackwell. No. He moved closer and Rosa caught the smell of whiskey on his breath. What are you interested in? That judge, I've seen how you look at him during his visits. Rosa's spine stiffened. My relationship with Judge Ashford is none of your concern. Everything about you is my concern. You're going to be my wife. I am not. He kissed her, or tried to. Rosa turned her head at the last moment, his lips catching her cheek instead of her mouth. Her hands came up instinctively, shoving hard against his chest. Preston stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt. His expression transformed from predatory charm to ugly anger. You little... Is there a problem here? Nathaniel's voice was cold as winter frost. He stood in the doorway, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his eyes were glacial. Preston recovered, quickly smoothing his waistcoat. Just a misunderstanding, Your Honor. Miss Thorne and I were having a private conversation. It didn't look private. It looked like assault. Nathaniel's gaze shifted to Rosa. Are you all right? She nodded, not trusting her voice. I think you should leave, Mr. Blackwell. Now. You have no authority here, Ashford. This is Thorne property, and I'm a guest of Mrs. Thorne. Then let me be clear. Nathaniel's voice never rose, but the threat in it was unmistakable. Touch Miss Rosalind again without her explicit consent, and I will personally ensure you're charged with assault. My authority as a circuit judge extends throughout this county. Test me if you'd like. Preston's jaw tightened, but he was smart enough to recognize a losing battle. He gave Rosa a mocking bow and left, slamming the library door behind him. The silence that followed was heavy. Thank you, Rosa said finally. You shouldn't have to thank me for basic decency. Nathaniel remained by the door, giving her space. Are you certain you're all right? He didn't... I'm fine. Angry, but fine. Rosa moved to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. Constance is escalating. The invitations, the dinners, now this. She's trying to force the marriage before I can build my case. Then we accelerate our timeline. Nathaniel pulled a folded letter from his jacket. Harrison sent this today. He's found irregularities in your father's death certificate. The attending physician, Dr. Thomas Pike. Rosa's head snapped around. Pike, the same family as Marcus Pike, Constance's attorney, his brother, which raises questions about conflict of interest and potentially fraudulent medical practice. Nathaniel's expression was grim. Harrison wants to request an exhumation, to have your father's remains examined by an independent coroner. The room tilted slightly. Rosa gripped the window frame for balance. You think she killed him? I think the timing is suspicious. I think having her attorney's brother sign the death certificate is suspicious. I think we need answers. He paused. But it's your decision, it's your father. I won't move forward without your consent. Rosa thought about her father's sudden death. The heart failure diagnosis that had surprised everyone. Edmund Thorne had been robust, healthy, showing no signs of illness. The rushed burial. Constance's immediate assumption of control. Veritas temporis filia. Truth is the daughter of time. Do it, she said. Request the exhumation. I need to know. January brought freezing rain and terrible news. The exhumation had been approved by a judge in Sacramento, not Nathaniel, who'd recused himself due to personal involvement, but a visiting magistrate known for integrity. The examination took place in the first week of the new year. Harrison arrived at Thorne Ranch on a gray afternoon with results that confirmed their darkest suspicions. Digitalis, he said quietly, showing Rosa the toxicology report in her father's study while Constance was out. A massive dose administered within 24 hours of death. Your father was poisoned. The words hung in the air like smoke. Rosa had expected this, had known on some level that Constance was capable of murder. But knowing intellectually and hearing it confirmed were different things. Her father hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered by the woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted. How? Rosa's voice came from far away. How did she do it? Digitalis is extracted from foxglove. In small doses, it's used to treat heart conditions. In large doses, it causes heart failure that's nearly indistinguishable from natural causes unless you're specifically testing for it. Harrison pulled out another document. We found a receipt. Constance purchased foxglove extract from an apothecary in San Francisco 2 weeks before your father's death. She told the pharmacist it was for her mother's heart condition. Her mother has been dead for 10 years. Exactly. Rosa sank into her father's chair, the leather creaking familiarly. 8 months ago, she'd sat here wondering what truth time would reveal. Now she had her answer, and it was worse than she'd imagined. We can file charges, Harrison continued. We have evidence. The toxicology report, the pharmacy receipt, the suspicious death certificate signed by Dr. Pike. It's enough for an investigation, possibly enough for trial. But, Rosa heard the hesitation in his voice. But murder charges against a wealthy white woman in 1886 California are difficult to prosecute. Constance has money for excellent attorneys. She has social connections. She can claim ignorance, claim the apothecary misunderstood her, claim anything. Even with this evidence, conviction isn't guaranteed. What are our chances? Harrison met her eyes honestly. 60%, maybe less if she hires someone like Clayton Harding. Rosa looked at the toxicology report, at the cold scientific language describing how her father had died. Murdered for money, killed by someone he'd trusted. I want her prosecuted, she said, not just for the fraud, for murder. Even if conviction isn't guaranteed, I want the truth on record. I want everyone to know what she did. Then we move forward. Harrison began gathering documents. I'll file charges this week. The sheriff will arrest her. There'll be a preliminary hearing, then trial. It will be public. Rosa, ugly. Your family's private affairs exposed for everyone to examine. Good. Rosa's voice was hard. Let them examine. Let them see exactly what Constance Vale Thorne is. The arrest happened 3 days later. Rosa was in the stables with Tobias when the sheriff arrived. She watched from the barn door as Constance was let out in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally shattering. Her stepmother screamed threats and accusations, claiming conspiracy, claiming Rosa had orchestrated everything. You'll regret this, Constance's voice carried across the yard. I'll destroy you, you ungrateful little. The sheriff helped her into the wagon, cutting off the tirade. Beatrice appeared at Rosa's side, her face pale. What happens now? Preliminary hearing in 2 weeks, then trial probably in March. She'll be held until then. Harrison convinced the judge she's a flight risk, given the severity of charges. Murder. Beatrice's voice was hollow. She killed your father, my stepfather. Yes. They stood in silence, watching the wagon disappear down the long drive. Then Beatrice spoke again, her voice small. I'm sorry for not seeing it, for not standing up for you, for being a coward. Rosa looked at her stepsister, 19 years old, shaped by a mother who'd taught her that survival meant silence. It would be easy to hold grudges, to blame Beatrice for her complicity. But Rosa was learning from the Stoics that some things were beyond control. Beatrice's past actions were one of those things. What Rosa could control was her response. You're standing up now, she said quietly. That's what matters. The preliminary hearing happened on a frigid morning in late January. The San Luis Obispo County Courthouse stood imposing against the winter sky, its granite facade promising justice but guaranteeing nothing. Rosa climbed the steps with Harrison at her side, her hands buried in her cloak against the cold. Inside, the courtroom was already half full with spectators drawn by scandal. Constance sat at the defense table with her attorney, not Clayton Harding, yet but a local lawyer named Samuel Brooks, who looked nervous about the evidence he'd have to counter. Judge Marcus Whitfield presided, a stern man in his 60s known for fairness and intolerance of theatrics. He called the hearing to order with a sharp crack of his gavel. District Attorney Rachel Kim stood to present the prosecution's case. Compact and fierce, she laid out the evidence with devastating clarity. Your Honor, the people will show that Constance Vale Thorne purchased foxglove extract 2 weeks before Edmund Thorne's death, that she had motive control of a $200,000 estate, that she had opportunity access to Mr. Thorne's food and drink, and that toxicology reports from his exhumed remains show lethal levels of digitalis, the poison derived from foxglove. She paused, letting the weight settle. Additionally, we have evidence of systematic financial fraud committed by Mrs. Thorne after Mr. Thorne's death, suggesting a pattern of criminal behavior. And we have testimony from her own daughter regarding suspicious conversations before the murder. Brooks stood to object. Your Honor, this is a preliminary hearing, not a trial. The prosecution is establishing sufficient cause to bind over for trial, Judge Whitfield interrupted, which is the purpose of this hearing. Continue, Miss Kim. Kim called her first witness, the toxicologist Dr. Robert Hawthorne. He testified about the exhumation, the tissue samples, the unmistakable presence of digitalis in concentrations that could only indicate poisoning. In your professional opinion, Dr. Hawthorne, what killed Edmund Thorne? Acute digitalis poisoning. Death would have occurred within 6 to 12 hours of ingestion. Brooks's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. The science was clear. The second witness was the apothecary from San Francisco, a nervous man named Gerald Reeves who brought his sales ledger. Do you recognize this signature? Kim showed him the receipt. Yes, ma'am, that's Mrs. Constance Thorne, or at least that's the name she gave. She purchased pharmaceutical-grade foxglove extract on August 6, 1885. Did she say what it was for? Said her elderly mother had a heart condition, needed it for medicinal purposes. And did you verify this? Reeves shifted uncomfortably. No, ma'am. She paid cash, seemed respectable. I didn't think to question it. Rosa watched Constance's face as the testimony unfolded. Her stepmother sat rigid, her expression carefully blank, but her hands gripped the table's edge until her knuckles went white. The third witness was Beatrice. Rosa's stepsister took the stand with visible trembling, but when she spoke, her voice was clear. 2 weeks before Edmund died, I overheard Mother on the telephone. She said it needs to look natural. Heart failure. The man drinks enough whiskey that no one will question it. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Constance's lawyer shot to his feet, objecting to hearsay, but Judge Whitfield allowed it as evidence of premeditation. And after Mr. Thorne died, Kim asked gently, Mother took control immediately. She dismissed workers, sold land, changed all the accounts. She told me we were finally secure, that we'd never have to worry about money again. Beatrice's voice broke. I didn't understand then what she'd done, but I remember her words, the old fool should have made me primary heir, but his daughter being a ward is almost as good. When Judge Whitfield asked if there was sufficient cause to bind over for trial, his answer was immediate. The evidence presented suggests probable cause that Constance Vale Thorne did willfully and with premeditation murder Edmund Thorne. This case will proceed to trial. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody until trial date set for March 15, 1886. His gavel fell with finality. As bailiffs led Constance away, she turned to look at Rosa one last time. The mask was completely gone now. What remained was pure, concentrated hatred. But Rosa met her gaze steadily, feeling none of the fear that would have paralyzed her 8 months ago. In the intervening time, Rosa threw herself into ranch work with single-minded intensity. She reviewed every contract, every transaction, every decision Constance had made in the past 8 months. She met with workers Constance had fired gathering testimony. She worked with Harrison and Nathaniel to build not just a criminal case, but a civil one, for recovery of the stolen funds for damages, for complete restoration of her inheritance. But the work was also escape. As long as she was busy with ledgers and legal documents, she didn't have to think about the gaping absence in her life. Her father was gone, not just dead murdered, and nothing Rosa did could change that. It was Nathaniel who finally pulled her out of the spiral. He found her in the study late one evening in early March, surrounded by papers, her eyes red from crying she'd tried to hide. Rosa, he knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle. When was the last time you slept? I don't know. Does it matter? Yes. He carefully took the ledger from her hands and set it aside. Your father wouldn't want this. You running yourself into exhaustion, sacrificing your health for justice. It's not just justice, it's... Rosa's voice broke. He's gone, Nathaniel, really gone. Murdered, and I'll never get him back. No, you won't, and that's a grief you'll carry always. Nathaniel pulled another chair close, sitting, so they were at eye level. But Edmund wouldn't want you to destroy yourself in pursuit of vengeance against the woman who killed him. He'd want you to live, to build, to become everything he knew you could be. The tears came then, hot and unchecked. Nathaniel didn't try to stop them or offer empty platitudes. He simply sat with her, a steady presence in the storm of her grief. When the crying finally subsided, Rosa wiped at her eyes roughly. What if I'm not strong enough? What if Constance's lawyers are better? What if she goes free? Then we pursue civil remedies. We file for recovery of stolen funds. We challenge everything she's ever done. Nathaniel's hands found hers warm and grounding. But I don't think she'll go free, Rosa. We have evidence, we have truth, and truth matters. Does it in a world where women are property and justice is expensive? Yes, even then. His gray eyes held hers with absolute certainty. Not always immediately, not always in the way we expect. But truth has weight, it has power, and eventually it prevails. Rosa wanted to believe him, Looking into his eyes, seeing the conviction there, she found she did. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being here, for believing in this, in me. Always." The word was simple, but weighted with promise. They sat in the quiet study, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. And for the first time in weeks, Rosa felt something other than grief and rage. She felt hope. The trial began on a cold morning in mid-March. The San Luis Obispo County Courthouse was packed beyond capacity. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, spectators crowding the hallway hoping for glimpses of testimony. The trial of Constance Vale Thorne had become the county's primary entertainment. Rosa sat at the prosecution table beside Harrison, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom. Constance watched her with cold calculation from the defense table. The jury, 10 men, 2 women, studied both of them with open curiosity. And in the back row, Nathaniel sat with Imogen, his expression carefully neutral, but his gray eyes holding steady encouragement. Constance had indeed hired Clayton Harding. The famous defense attorney from San Francisco sat beside her, looking distinguished and confident, ready to wage war on her behalf. Judge Whitfield called the trial to order. District Attorney Rachel Kim delivered an opening statement that laid out the prosecution's case with devastating clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a story about greed, about a woman who married a wealthy rancher, waited just long enough to avoid suspicion, and then poisoned him to inherit his fortune. The evidence will show that Constance Vale Thorne purchased foxglove extract, a deadly poison, 2 weeks before Edmund Thorne's death. That she had her attorney's brother, Dr. Thomas Pike, falsify the death certificate. That she immediately began liquidating assets, stealing nearly $200,000 from the estate she was supposed to protect. And that when Edmund Thorne's daughter discovered these crimes, Mrs. Thorne attempted to have her committed to an asylum to silence her." Kim paused, letting the words settle over the jury. "The defense will try to paint this as a family dispute, a stepdaughter bitter about her father's remarriage. But the evidence tells a different story, a story of premeditated murder, of calculated theft, of a woman so consumed by greed that she was willing to destroy anyone who stood in her way." Clayton Harding rose for the defense. He was every bit as compelling as his reputation suggested, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, his bearing distinguished. "Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution would have you believe a simple story. Wicked stepmother, innocent victim, clear-cut guilt. But life is rarely that simple." He paced before the jury, hands clasped behind his back. "Constance Vale Thorne is a widow grieving the sudden loss of her husband. Edmund Thorne's death was tragic, but it was also natural. Heart failure, as documented by a licensed physician. The prosecution's so-called evidence, a receipt for medicine, and the wild accusations of a young woman who stood to inherit a fortune if only her stepmother were removed from guardianship." His gaze swept the courtroom, landing briefly on Rosa. "Is it so difficult to believe that a young woman desperate to control her inheritance might fabricate evidence, might manipulate officials? The truth, I submit, is it far more complex than the prosecution admits. And when you hear all the evidence, you'll see that reasonable doubt exists in abundance." The first day brought medical testimony. Dr. Robert Hawthorne explained the toxicology findings in detail, the digitalis concentrations, the timeline of poisoning, the impossibility of accidental ingestion. Harding's cross-examination was surgical. "Dr. Hawthorne, you examined tissue samples from a body that had been buried for 5 months. Is contamination possible?" "We took extensive precautions." "Yes or no, doctor? Is contamination possible?" "Anything is possible, but—" "Thank you. No further questions." The second day brought the apothecary Gerald Reeves, who identified Constance as the purchaser of foxglove extract. Harding suggested the signature could have been forged, that anyone could have used Constance's name. "Did you verify her identity?" Mr. Reeves required documentation. "No, sir. She seemed respectable." "So anyone could have claimed to be Mrs. Thorne, purchased this poison, and you'd have no way of knowing?" "Correct." "I suppose that's possible." Day 3 brought Beatrice to the stand. Rosa's stepsister looked fragile in her plain gray dress, but her voice remained steady as she recounted the overheard telephone conversation about making Edmund's death look natural. Harding's cross-examination was brutal. "Miss Vale, you were 19 when this alleged conversation occurred. A young woman. Are you certain you remember it accurately? Or has your stepsister, who stands to inherit a fortune, perhaps convinced you that you heard something convenient to her narrative?" "No, I know what I heard." "Do you, or have months of living under Miss Thorne's influence clouded your memory?" Beatrice's face flushed with anger. "My mother killed a good man. I'm telling the truth." "The truth as you believe it." or the truth as you've been persuaded to believe it. There's a difference. When Beatrice stepped down, she was crying. Rosa caught her in the hallway, holding her while she shook. "I'm sorry," Beatrice sobbed. "I wasn't strong enough." "You were brave," Rosa said fiercely. "You told the truth. That's all anyone can ask." Day 4 was Rosa's turn. She climbed to the witness stand on trembling legs, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom. Rachel Kim's examination established the foundation: Rosa's relationship with her father, his sudden death, Constance's immediate assumption of control. "When did you first suspect your stepmother of financial impropriety?" Rosa described discovering the ledgers, the systematic theft, the $197,000 in missing funds. "And when you confronted Mrs. Thorne about these discrepancies, she struck me in front of 50 witnesses at a social gathering, then threatened to have me committed to an asylum if I continued to question her management." Kim produced photographs of Rosa's bruised face from the night of the rescue. Several jury members shifted uncomfortably. Then Harding stood for cross-examination. "Miss Thorne, you've painted quite a picture. Villainous stepmother, innocent victim, very compelling, but let's examine your motives." He paced before the stand. "You resented your father's remarriage, didn't you?" "I was concerned about Constance's character." "Yes or no, Miss Thorne?" "Did you resent the marriage?" Rosa forced herself to breathe evenly. "I didn't trust Constance. My father deserved better." "How convenient that he died shortly after you began harboring these suspicions. And how even more convenient that his death left you as the primary heir, with only your stepmother's guardianship standing between you and a fortune." "Are you suggesting I killed my own father?" "I'm suggesting that a young woman desperate for independence and inheritance might have ample motive." Harding leaned closer. "After all, you had access to his food and drink. You knew his habits, and according to pharmacy records, foxglove extract can be ordered through mail catalog without verification." "That's insane. I love my father." "Love and greed can coexist, Miss Thorne." "Objection." Rachel Kim was on her feet. "Counsel is badgering the witness with baseless accusations." "Sustained." Judge Whitfield fixed Harding with a stern look. "Mr. Harding, unless you have evidence supporting this line of questioning, move on." But the damage was done. Harding had successfully planted the seed of doubt. What if the stepdaughter, not the stepmother, was the real murderer? Rosa left the stand shaking. Day 5 brought Constance herself. She wore black widow's weeds perfectly tailored. Her blonde hair was demure under a small hat. When she spoke, her voice trembled with carefully calibrated emotion. Harding led her through a narrative of devoted widowhood. She'd loved Edmund deeply. His death had devastated her. She'd done her best to manage his estate, to care for his difficult daughter. "Mrs. Thorne, did you poison your husband?" "No." Tears gathered in Constance's eyes. "Edmund was the love of my life. I would never harm him." The prosecution has presented a receipt showing you purchased foxglove extract. Can you explain that?" "I never made such a purchase. Someone must have used my name fraudulently. Perhaps Rosalind herself. She had access to my correspondence, my accounts." The performance was masterful. Rosa watched jury members soften, saw sympathy replace suspicion in several faces. Rachel Kim's cross-examination tried to crack the facade. "Mrs. Thorne, you claim to have loved your husband. Yet records show you began selling his land at below market value within weeks of his death. Can you explain that?" "I was grieving. I trusted advisors who told me the prices were fair. Advisors who happened to profit from the sales. I made mistakes. That doesn't make me a murderer." "You struck your stepdaughter in front of witnesses." "Why wait?" Constance's composure didn't waver. "Rosalind was making wild accusations. I lost my temper. It was wrong and I regret it. But one moment of anger doesn't make me a murderer. It makes me human." Day 6 brought closing arguments. Rachel Kim spoke with controlled passion, summarizing the evidence piece by piece. The toxicology report, the pharmacy receipt, Beatrice's testimony, the pattern of financial fraud. "The defense wants you to believe this is all coincidence, that the foxglove was ordered by someone else, that the theft was honest mismanagement, that Constance Vale Thorne is simply an unlucky widow falsely accused." Kim paused. "But evidence doesn't lie. Poison was purchased. Poison was administered. Edmund Thorne died, and Constance Vale Thorne benefited enormously." Harding's closing focused relentlessly on reasonable doubt. "The prosecution has shown you documents and testimony, but they haven't proven who actually purchased that extract. They haven't proven who administered it. They haven't eliminated other suspects." He gestured toward Rosa. Miss Thorne had motive, means, and opportunity. Yet we're asked to believe she's purely innocent. Ladies and gentlemen, the law requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. That burden hasn't been met. The jury deliberated for 12 hours. Rosa spent them in a private room adjacent to the courthouse, unable to eat, unable to sit still. Nathaniel stayed with her, not offering false reassurances, just steady presence. Whatever happens, he said as afternoon shadows lengthened, you've already won. You exposed the truth. You fought back. But if they acquit her, then we pursue other remedies, but I don't think they will. The bailiff appeared in the doorway. Juries reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed tighter than before. The jury filed in with expressions Rosa couldn't read. Judge Whitfield took his seat. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood, one of the ranchers who'd known Edmund. We have your honor. On the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find? The pause before his answer seemed to stretch for eternity. We find the defendant, Constance Vale Thorne, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Rosa heard the word through a roar of blood in her ears. Guilty. They'd believed the evidence. They'd seen through Constance's performance. Beside her, Harrison gripped her hand. Behind her, Imogen's voice rose in fierce triumph, and in the back row, Nathaniel's expression held relief and pride and something deeper. Judge Whitfield's gavel eventually restored order. Constance Vage frozen at the defense table, her perfect composure finally shattered. The defendant will rise for sentencing. Constance stood, her attorney supporting her elbow. Judge Whitfield's voice was grave. Mrs. Thorne, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Edmund Thorne. You exploited his trust, ended his life for financial gain, and attempted to destroy his daughter when she sought truth. This court sentences you to 25 years in the California State Prison with no possibility of parole for 20 years. He paused. Additionally, I am ordering full restitution of all funds stolen from the Thorne estate, seizure of all assets acquired through illegal means, and immediate termination of all guardianship authority. Miss Rosalind Thorne is hereby granted full legal control of her inheritance, effective immediately. The gavel fell with finality. As bailiffs led Constance away, she turned to look at Rosa one last time. You think you've won, she whispered, venom in every syllable. You'll end up alone, bitter, just like me. Rosa met her gaze steadily. No, Constance, I chose partnership over power. That's something you never understood. Then Constance was gone, and Rosa was surrounded by people offering congratulations she barely heard. It was over, truly over. Justice had been served. The aftermath came in waves. First, the legal cleanup. Harrison spent 2 weeks sorting through paperwork, ensuring every aspect of Constance's conviction was properly documented. The stolen funds were recovered, most of them. The ranch was restored to full operational capacity. Rosa was no longer a ward. She was a rancher, a property owner, a woman with complete autonomy. The freedom should have felt exhilarating. Instead, it felt heavy-weighted with responsibility and the absence of the man who should have been there to see it. She stood in her father's study one evening in early April, holding his pocket watch, and finally allowed herself to grieve properly. Not the stunned numbness of sudden loss, not the functional grief of someone too busy surviving, but deep, wrenching sobs for the father who'd believed in her and died before seeing her become who he'd known she could be. Nathaniel found her there. She couldn't remember if she'd sent for him or if he'd simply known. He didn't speak. He simply sat beside her and let her cry, his presence steady as it had been from the beginning. When the tears finally subsided, Rosa spoke into the quiet. He'll never see what I build, never know that I succeeded. He knows. Nathaniel's voice was certain. His teachings are in you. His values guide you. His legacy continues through your choices. Rosa opened the watch, reading the inscription through blurred vision. Time revealed the truth, but it also took him away. There's beauty in that, too. You had him for 22 years. He shaped who you are. That doesn't end with death. Nathaniel paused. My wife and daughter have been gone 6 years, but I still hear their voices. The dead don't leave us. They become part of the foundation we build on. They sat in companionable silence. Finally, Nathaniel spoke again. There's something I need to say. Rosa turned to look at him. His expression was vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. 8 months ago, I intervened because I'd made a promise to your father, but my motivation has changed. He met her eyes directly. I care about you, Rosa, deeply, in a way that goes beyond friendship or alliance. Rosa's breath caught. I know the timing is complicated. You've just won your freedom. You're grieving. You're rebuilding your life. His voice remained steady. But I also know that life is short. So I'm telling you now, I care for you. I admire your courage, your intelligence, your determination. And when you're ready to consider more than partnership, I'll be here. He started to stand to give her space. But Rosa caught his hand. Wait. He stopped, looking down at their joined hands. I need to ask you something, and I need absolute honesty. Always. Do you see me as your equal, not someday, but now as I am? Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Yes, unequivocally. You've shown more courage and intelligence in 8 months than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. Equal in many ways, you surpass me. Then I have a proposition. His eyebrow rose slightly. I'm not ready for romance. Not yet. I need time to simply be, to discover who I am when I'm not fighting. She tightened her grip on his hand. But I am ready for partnership. Real partnership. Building something together, not you protecting me, but both of us contributing equally. Understanding dawned in Nathaniel's expression. What kind of partnership? I have ideas about reforming ranch management, worker protections, profit sharing, making Thorn Ranch a model for ethical operations. Rosa's words came faster. But California law is unjust to women. You're a judge. You have influence. What if we work together, me as a living example of what women can accomplish, you pushing legal reform? A political and social partnership, Nathaniel said slowly, built on shared values. Exactly. And if someday that partnership develops into something more, we'll face that decision from strength, not need. Nathaniel smiled, the full, genuine smile that transformed his face. I accept your proposition. Partners now. Romance when you're ready. No pressure, no expectations. Rosa stood, offering her hand formally. Partners. Partners. He shook her hand with mock solemnity, then pulled her into a brief, tight embrace. Though I reserve the right to continue caring about you deeply, I wouldn't expect anything less. Spring arrived with the gentle insistence of new growth. The Thorn Ranch transformed under Rosa's management. She rehired every worker Constance had fired, instituting fair wages and profit-sharing agreements. She modernized breeding programs. She opened the ranch school to 60 children, teaching critical thinking alongside basic education. Rosa herself was changing, growing into the role her father had prepared her for. She cut her hair shorter, started wearing practical riding clothes, and made ranch rounds every morning. Workers began calling her boss lady with genuine respect. Imogen's suffrage meetings became cornerstones of Rosa's week. The group grew to 60 women, and Rosa found herself not just attending, but leading discussions about property law and political strategy. We need to organize a petition drive, she proposed one evening in May. California women won't get the vote through polite requests. We need numbers, organization, pressure. Agreed, said Dr. Sarah Mitchell. But we also need male allies, sympathetic lawmakers. All eyes turned to Rosa. I'll talk to Judge Ashford, see if he has connections in Sacramento. Through it all, Nathaniel was there, not hovering but collaborating. They met weekly to discuss strategy. He introduced her to lawmakers. She provided real-world examples of why reforms were necessary. The partnership worked because neither tried to dominate. When Rosa had expertise, Nathaniel deferred. When he had knowledge, she listened. But the relationship was more than professional. There were moments when their eyes would meet across legal documents, and Rosa felt electric awareness. Times when Nathaniel's hand would brush hers, and she'd remember his declaration. One evening in late May, as they walked Ashford Ranch grounds after a strategy session, Nathaniel spoke carefully. There's a legislative session in Sacramento next month. Several reform proposals are up for debate. I'm testifying. That's excellent. I'd like you to come to testify about your experience with guardianship abuse. Rosa stopped walking, considering. Testifying would make her story public, but it would also give voice to thousands of women suffering under unjust laws. I'll do it, she said. If my story can help change the law, it needs to be told. Nathaniel's expression held pride in something deeper. You're remarkable. I'm practical. No, remarkable. He reached out his hand, rising to cup her face gently. May I? Rosa understood what he was asking. She stepped closer. Yes. Nathaniel kissed her, gentle, questioning. Rosa didn't pull away. She leaned into the kiss, into the warmth and steadiness it represented. When they parted, both were smiling. Was that appropriate for our professional alliance? He asked. Probably not, but partnerships can evolve. Rosa took his hand. This feels like evolution. The Sacramento testimony happened in June. Rosa stood before the California State Assembly and told her story with clear-eyed precision. the guardianship law that had enabled theft and abuse, the near impossibility of challenging it without resources. I was lucky, she said. I had education and allies, but thousands of women don't. They suffer under laws that treat them as property. Gentlemen, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equal treatment. That's not radical. That's basic justice. The reforms didn't pass that session, but they came close, only 6 votes short. The conversation had shifted. We'll try again next year, Nathaniel said on the train home. Build more support, refine proposals. Rosa nodded, watching California landscape roll past. We will, and eventually we'll win. You sound certain. I am, because time reveals truth, and the truth is these laws are unjust. She smiled. Marcus Aurelius writes that patience is a form of action. We're being patient, but we're also being strategic. 2 years after Constance's conviction, Rosa stood on the eastern hill overlooking Thorn Ranch. The view was breathtaking, 60,000 acres of thriving land. The school building near the main house, children's voices carrying on the breeze. The ranch office showing lights where workers reviewed records. Beatrice appeared beside her, carrying wildflowers for Edmund's grave. At 21, she'd transformed, studying art therapy in San Francisco, building an independent life. He'd love what you've done, Beatrice said. I hope so, Rosa smiled, though I think he'd argue with some of my decisions. They placed flowers on the grave. The headstone bore only Edmund Thorne. Truth endures. After Beatrice left, Rosa remained. I did it, Papa, she said softly. I saved the ranch. I fought Constance and won. I'm building something good, something that honors what you started while pushing beyond it. The wind rustled through oak trees. And I found someone who sees me as your equal, who respects my mind, someone who makes me want to be better while accepting who I am. Rosa smiled, thinking of Nathaniel. We're getting married in August. Small ceremony. I wish you could walk me down the aisle. But you will be in a way. Your watch will be in my pocket. Your values will guide my vows. She pulled out the pocket watch, opening it. Veritas temporis filia. You were right, Rosa whispered. Time revealed all truths. Constance's crimes, my own strength, the possibility of partnership based on equality. She closed the watch, feeling its steady tick. Thank you for preparing me, for believing in me, for teaching me that truth matters, that integrity matters, that how we treat people defines who we are. The sun was setting, painting the sky gold and rose. Rosa took one last look at her father's grave, then turned toward the ranch house where Nathaniel waited, where Imogen was probably debating politics with Tobias, where workers finished their day with fair compensation and dignity. This was legacy, not inheritance received passively, but vision built actively. Rosa walked down the hill toward her life, the one she'd chosen, the one she'd fought for, the one that was hers not by birthright, but by courage. Truth was the daughter of time. And time had finally revealed that she was strong enough to claim her truth, build her legacy, and choose her love. Not from need, not from fear, but from the unshakable foundation of knowing exactly who she was. Some legacies were inherited, the best ones were chosen and built, and Rosalind Thorne was just getting started.